The words "shut on, shut up" hung in the sunlit air of the Sterling Mansion's marble foyer like a thunderclap, echoing off crystal chandeliers and imported Italian tile as Rosa Martinez stood trembling before her billionaire employer, her cleaning supplies scattered at her feet where she dropped them in desperation. Jonathan Sterling, tech mogul worth $12 billion, froze mid-sentence in his phone conversation about lazy people who refuse to work and expect handouts, his voice cutting through Rosa's heart like shards of glass because he had no idea that his devoted mate of 3 years was listening to him mock the very situation destroying her life. Rosa's dark eyes, rimmed with exhaustion from working 4 jobs, blazed with a pain so profound that it seemed to fill the entire room with its weight, her small frame shaking as she interrupted the most powerful man she'd ever known. "Please, Mr. Sterling," she whispered, her voice breaking like autumn leaves, "just shut up. You don't know what you're talking about." What Jonathan discovered in the next 30 seconds about his lazy employee would shatter his worldview and reveal a sacrifice so beautiful and heartbreaking that it would change both their lives forever, proving that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the love that drives us to impossible lengths for those we cherish most. If stories about the quiet heroes walking among us, the ones whose struggles remain invisible until someone finally sees them, move your soul the way they move ours, then you've found your home. Hit that subscribe button and join the Acts of Depth family, because Rosa's truth will remind you that behind every service worker, every tired face, every person society overlooks, there's a story that could break your heart and rebuild it stronger. Rosa Martinez had been cleaning the Sterling Mansion since dawn, her worn sneakers silent on the polished floors as morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits around her methodical movements. At 34, with calloused hands that spoke of countless hours scrubbing, dusting, and polishing, she moved through the 40-room estate with the efficiency of someone who couldn't afford to waste a single moment. Every surface she touched gleamed under her care, from the mahogany banisters to the imported marble countertops. But the real gleam came from her eyes when she thought about why she pushed herself through 18-hour days without complaint. Her phone buzzed softly in her apron pocket, and she glanced at the message with a mixture of hope and dread. "Appointment moved to 2 p.m. Dr. Harrison says we can discuss next steps then." "Love you, Mama." Rosa's heart clenched as she thought about her 7-year-old daughter, Sofia, who was at this very moment sitting in a hospital room 50 miles away, her small body fighting a battle that required treatments Rosa could barely afford, even with 4 jobs. The Sterling Mansion job paid the best, $200 for a full day's work, but it was only one piece of the financial puzzle Rosa was desperately trying to solve. Jonathan Sterling's voice echoed from his home office, where he paced behind a glass desk that probably cost more than Rosa made in a year, gesticulating wildly as he conducted a video conference with his board of directors. Through the open door, Rosa could see him in his casual billionaire uniform, designer jeans, and a cashmere sweater that looked effortlessly expensive, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. At 56, Jonathan had built Sterling Tech from a college dorm room startup into a global empire, his innovations in artificial intelligence making him one of the youngest billionaires in history. But his success had also insulated him from the realities most people faced. "The problem with this country," Jonathan was saying into his phone as he transitioned from the video call to what sounded like a conversation with a friend, "is that people have lost the work ethic that built America. Everyone wants a handout instead of putting in the effort. My grandmother cleaned houses during the Depression, but she never asked for government assistance. She understood that hard work and personal responsibility were the path to success." Rosa paused in her dusting of a priceless vase, the feather duster trembling in her grip as Jonathan's words penetrated her concentration like arrows finding their mark. She tried to focus on her work, tried to let the comments roll off her like water off glass, but each word felt personal, directed at her situation, even though Jonathan had no idea what she was facing. "I'm telling you, David," Jonathan continued, warming to his topic as he moved to the window overlooking his manicured gardens, "these welfare programs just enable laziness. If people really wanted to improve their situations, they'd find a way." Look at my staff. My housekeeper Rosa is a perfect example. She works hard, doesn't complain, doesn't ask for anything extra. That's the attitude that leads to success. The irony of being held up as an example of someone who doesn't ask for anything extra while she was literally drowning in medical bills made Rosa's stomach turn. She thought about the three other jobs she worked: cleaning office buildings at night, doing laundry for neighbors on weekends, and serving lunch shifts at a diner when her schedule allowed. She thought about the meals she skipped so Sofia could have proper nutrition during her treatments, the sleep she sacrificed to earn every possible dollar, the way she smiled and said, "Fine," whenever anyone asked how she was doing, because admitting the truth felt like admitting defeat. But it was Jonathan's next words that finally broke something inside her, shattering her professional composure like a hammer through crystal. The truth is, people who can't afford health care probably shouldn't have had children in the first place. It's just irresponsible to bring kids into the world when you can't provide for them properly. The feather duster clattered to the marble floor as Rosa's entire body went rigid, the sound echoing through the mansion's pristine halls like a gunshot in a cathedral. Jonathan's words had found their target with devastating precision, striking at the very core of her existence, the love that gave meaning to every sacrifice she made. Her breathing became shallow as memories flooded back. Holding Sofia for the first time, that perfect moment when her daughter's tiny fingers wrapped around hers, the promise she'd whispered into those impossibly small ears. "Mama will always take care of you, mi amor." Always. Rosa had been 19 when Sofia was born, a single mother working her way through community college with dreams of becoming a nurse. Sofia's father had disappeared the moment he learned about the pregnancy, leaving Rosa to face the judgment of people who saw her as another statistic, another young Latina woman who'd made poor choices. But Sofia had never been a mistake. She was Rosa's miracle, her reason for breathing, the light that guided every decision Rosa made. When the doctors delivered Sofia's diagnosis 18 months ago, a rare autoimmune condition that required expensive treatments and constant monitoring, Rosa had never once regretted having her daughter. She'd only regretted that the world made it so hard for people like them to survive. "The thing about personal responsibility," Jonathan continued, his voice carrying through the open office door like poison in Rosa's ears, "is that it requires making tough choices. If you can't afford a child's medical care, maybe the responsible thing is to admit that and make the hard decision about their future." The words hit Rosa like physical blows, each syllable a betrayal of every hour she'd spent in this house, every surface she'd cleaned while Jonathan worked above her, oblivious to her reality. She thought about the hard decision he was suggesting, the impossible choice between her daughter's life and financial responsibility, and something primal roared to life in her chest. The careful composure she'd maintained for 3 years, the professional smile that hid her exhaustion, the grateful deference she showed despite the way his family often treated her like living furniture. All of it crumbled in the space between heartbeats. Rosa's hands shook as she untied her apron, the fabric falling to the floor in a pool of defeat and defiance. She'd spent years perfecting the art of invisibility, moving through wealthy homes like a ghost who cleaned up after the living, accepting casual indignities because she needed the money too desperately to fight back. But some lines couldn't be crossed, even by people who signed her paychecks. Some things were more important than keeping a job, more sacred than financial security. The 30 steps from the foyer to Jonathan's office felt like walking through water, each footfall echoing in Rosa's ears like a countdown to the end of her employment, the end of her best-paying job, possibly the end of her ability to afford Sofia's treatments. But she kept walking, driven by a force stronger than fear, stronger than poverty, stronger than the practical voice in her head that screamed about bills and medical expenses and the impossibility of finding another job that paid as well. Jonathan was still talking, his back to the door, as he gazed out at gardens that cost more to maintain each month than Rosa made in a year. I mean, think about it logically, David. If someone can't afford basic necessities for their child, they're essentially asking society to subsidize their decision to reproduce. At what point do we say enough is enough? "Mr. Sterling," Rosa's voice cut through his monologue like a blade through silk, quiet but carrying enough steel to make him turn around in surprise. She stood in his doorway, no longer the invisible cleaning lady, but a woman transformed by grief and rage into something he'd never seen before. "Please stop talking." Jonathan's eyebrows rose at the interruption, his phone still pressed to his ear as he took in Rosa's appearance. No apron, no cleaning supplies, just a small woman with tired eyes that blazed with an intensity that made him take a step back. "Rosa, is everything all right? I'm in the middle of an important call." "I said stop." Rosa's voice gained strength, carrying 3 years of swallowed pride and hidden pain. "Just please, shut up. You don't know what you're talking about." The words hung between them like a bridge burning, the professional distance that had defined their relationship consumed by flames of truth and desperation. Jonathan's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his privileged brain struggling to process the idea that his employee, his grateful, deferential, invisible employee, had just told him to shut up in his own home. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled only by the distant tick of an antique grandfather clock and the sound of Rosa's labored breathing as she stood in the doorway of Jonathan's office, her small frame trembling with the weight of words she couldn't take back. Sunlight slanted through the massive windows behind Jonathan's desk, casting long shadows across Persian rugs that cost more than most people's cars. But the brightness couldn't illuminate the darkness of the moment Rosa was living through. Jonathan ended his phone call with a terse goodbye, his eyes never leaving Rosa's face as he tried to reconcile the woman before him with the quiet, efficient employee he thought he knew. "Rosa, I don't understand what's happening here, but you can't just barge into my office and—" "My daughter is dying." The words escaped Rosa's lips like birds fleeing a cage, raw and desperate and unstoppable. "Sofia is 7 years old and she's dying, and I work 4 jobs trying to pay for treatments that might save her life. So when you stand there talking about people like me, about children like her, like we're just statistics in your economic theory, I can't listen anymore." The color drained from Jonathan's face as if someone had pulled a plug, his confident posture collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. Rosa watched the transformation, seeing perhaps for the first time the human being beneath the billionaire's armor. The man who suddenly looked lost in his own office, surrounded by all his expensive things that couldn't protect him from the truth standing before him. Rosa's voice gained momentum, 3 years of suppressed emotion pouring out like water through a broken dam. "You want to know about personal responsibility? I get up at 4 in the morning to clean office buildings before I come here. I work here from 8 until 4, then I go to the diner until 10 at night. On weekends, I do laundry for neighbors and clean other houses. I haven't bought myself new clothes in 2 years because every dollar goes to Sofia's medical bills or keeping us fed." She pulled her phone from her pocket with shaking hands, scrolling to a photo that made her heart contract with love and pain in equal measure. "This is Sofia," she said, holding the screen toward Jonathan. "She loves butterflies and wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up. She asks me every night if the treatments are working, if she's gonna get better, and I tell her yes because I can't bear to see fear in a 7-year-old's eyes." Jonathan stared at the photo, a little girl with Rosa's dark eyes and a smile that could light up rooms, wearing a hospital gown but still radiating joy. And something fundamental shifted inside him. The child in the picture wasn't a statistic or a policy debate. She was real. She was beautiful. And she was loved by the woman he'd unknowingly been talking about with such casual cruelty. "The hard decision you mentioned," Rosa continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more power than shouting, "about what responsible parents do when they can't afford medical care. I think about that every single day. I wonder if I'm being selfish keeping her alive when each treatment costs thousands of dollars we don't have. But then she hugs me and tells me she loves me, and I remember that her life isn't a financial equation. She's not a burden or a mistake or an example of poor planning. She's my daughter." Rosa's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clutched the phone that held her daughter's image. "I don't ask for handouts, Mr. Sterling. I work harder than you can imagine, and it's still not enough. But Sofia didn't choose to be born, and she didn't choose to get sick. And she sure as hell didn't choose to have a mother who isn't rich enough to save her without destroying herself in the process. The grandfather clock chimed noon, its melodic notes seeming to mark the end of one world and the beginning of another. Jonathan stood frozen behind his desk, the phone call that had started this encounter forgotten, his entire worldview crumbling under the weight of Rosa's truth. The woman he'd held up as an example of proper work ethic had just revealed that his example was built on ignorance, that his praise was meaningless because he'd never bothered to see the human being behind the service. "I need this job," Rosa said finally, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I need it more than you can understand. But I won't stand here and listen to you talk about my daughter like she's something that should never have existed. So if that means I'm fired, then I'm fired. But at least I'll leave with my dignity intact." Jonathan sank into his leather chair as if the weight of Rosa's words had physically pushed him down, his hands trembling as he processed the magnitude of his ignorance. The sunlight streaming through his office windows seemed harsh now, illuminating not just the expensive furniture and awards that decorated his sanctuary, but the moral blindness that had allowed him to speak so carelessly about the very woman who had been keeping his world pristine while hers fell apart. "Rosa," he said, his voice hoarse with something that might have been shame, "I had no idea. In 3 years, you never said anything about your daughter being sick, never asked for help or mentioned any problems." Rosa's laugh was bitter, tinged with the exhaustion of someone who had learned that showing vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Mr. Sterling, when was the last time you asked me anything about my life? When have you ever wondered why I sometimes have red eyes, or why I check my phone during breaks? You see me clean your house, you pay me, and that's the extent of our relationship. Why would I burden you with my problems when you've made it clear that poor people's struggles are just evidence of their moral failings?" The accusation hit its mark with surgical precision, and Jonathan felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: genuine humility. He thought about all the interactions he'd had with Rosa over the years, how she'd been nothing more than efficient furniture to him, reliable but invisible. He tried to remember if he'd ever asked about her family, her dreams, her life beyond his marble floors and crystal fixtures. The silence that followed his mental search was damning. "How much do the treatments cost?" Jonathan asked quietly, his business mind automatically shifting toward problem-solving mode, even as his conscience reeled from its awakening. "It doesn't matter," Rosa replied, her pride flaring even through her tears. "I didn't tell you this so you'd fix it. I told you because I needed you to understand that the people you dismiss so easily aren't numbers in a spreadsheet. We're human beings with stories you've never bothered to learn." But Jonathan was already moving, his fingers flying over his phone as he accessed accounts and made calculations that would have staggered Rosa if she'd known their magnitude. "The treatments, Rosa. How much do they cost, and how much do you still owe?" Rosa hesitated, recognizing the tone of a man accustomed to solving problems with money, but also sensing something different in his urgency. "The total treatment plan is $300,000. Insurance covers about 40%, and I've managed to pay another $60,000 between my jobs and other sacrifices. But the hospital needs another $120,000 for Sofia to complete the full course of treatment." Jonathan's expression didn't change as he absorbed numbers that represented Rosa's entire world, but his mind was racing through possibilities and solutions. $120,000 was less than he spent on art in a typical month, less than the bonus he'd given his personal trainer the previous Christmas, an amount so small in the context of his wealth that it might as well have been pocket change. "There's something else," Rosa continued, her voice growing smaller. "The doctors want to start the next phase of treatment within 2 weeks, or—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the possibility that haunted her dreams and woke her up in cold sweats. "Or what?" Jonathan pressed gently, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Or they'll have to discuss other options, palliative care, making her comfortable while—" Rosa's voice broke completely, the words too terrible to speak aloud in the bright, clean sanctuary of Jonathan's office. The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility and transformation. Jonathan stared at his phone, at bank account balances that could solve Rosa's crisis without even registering as an expense in his monthly budget. But he also understood that this moment was about more than money, more than a simple transaction that would ease his conscience and return his world to its comfortable order. "Rosa," he said finally, his voice carrying a weight she'd never heard before, "I want to pay for Sofia's treatments. All of them. But first, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Rosa's eyes widened, hope and suspicion warring in her expression as she waited for whatever condition would accompany his offer. She'd learned that wealthy people's generosity always came with strings attached, usually ones that left the recipient feeling more indebted than grateful. "If money weren't an issue," Jonathan continued, "if Sophia's treatments were completely covered and you didn't have to work 4 jobs just to survive, what would you want to do with your life? What dreams did you have before you had to choose between your future and your daughter's?" The question hung in the air like a bridge between two worlds, and Rosa felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the possibility that someone might actually care about her answer. Rosa stared at Jonathan with the expression of someone who had forgotten that dreams were allowed, her eyes reflecting a mix of wonder and wariness as she processed a question no one had asked her in 7 years. The afternoon light had shifted, casting the office in a golden glow that made the moment feel suspended in time, as if the entire universe was holding its breath waiting for her answer. "I wanted to be a nurse," Rosa said finally, her voice so soft that Jonathan had to lean forward to hear her. "Before Sofia was born, I was in nursing school. I had a scholarship and everything. I wanted to work in pediatric oncology because I knew what it felt like to watch someone you love suffer, and I thought maybe I could help other families navigate that kind of pain." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Rosa had dreamed of helping children with cancer, and now she was living the nightmare she'd hoped to ease for others. Jonathan felt the full weight of how the world's cruelty had twisted her aspirations into pure survival, transforming someone who wanted to heal into someone who had to clean up after others just to keep her own child alive. "I still have my textbooks," Rosa continued, a ghost of her younger self flickering across her features. "I know it sounds stupid, but I couldn't bring myself to sell them, even when we needed money for Sofia's first round of treatments. They're packed away in our apartment, covered in my notes from lectures I'll never finish attending." Jonathan stood up abruptly, pacing to his window where his view encompassed gardens worth more than most people's homes, his mind working with the same intensity he brought to billion-dollar deals. But this wasn't about profit margins or market share. This was about redemption, about using his obscene wealth for something that actually mattered. "Here's what's going to happen," Jonathan said, turning back to face Rosa with the kind of determined expression that had built his empire. "I'm paying for all of Sofia's treatments, past, present, and future. Not as charity, but as an investment in the future nurse who's going to help save other children's lives. And I'm going to cover your living expenses while you finish nursing school." Rosa's legs nearly gave out, forcing her to grab the doorframe for support as the magnitude of his offer crashed over her like a tsunami of possibility. "Mr. Sterling, I can't accept that. It's too much, and I haven't done anything to deserve—" "You haven't done anything?" Jonathan interrupted, his voice rising with an emotion he rarely let others see. "Rosa, you've spent 3 years keeping my home perfect, while your world was falling apart. You've smiled and said good morning to me on days when you probably wanted to scream. You've shown me what real strength looks like, what actual work ethic means, what love will drive a person to endure. If anyone deserves this, it's you." Tears flowed freely down Rosa's cheeks now, years of suppressed hope and buried dreams suddenly given permission to breathe again. She thought about Sofia in her hospital bed, about the textbooks gathering dust in their tiny apartment, about the future that had seemed impossible just moments ago. "There's one condition," Jonathan added, and Rosa's heart clenched with familiar dread. "I want you to quit your other 3 jobs immediately. I want you to focus on Sofia's recovery and your own education. And I want you to know that this isn't about making me feel better about myself. This is about making sure the world doesn't lose the nurse Sofia is going to inspire you to become. 6 months later, the Sterling mansion gleamed under different hands as Rosa sat in a pediatric oncology lecture at the State University. Her textbooks, no longer dusty, spread before her as she took notes with the intensity of someone who understood that knowledge could be the difference between life and death. Sofia's latest scans had shown complete remission, her 7-year-old body finally winning the battle against the disease that had nearly stolen her future. The scholarship Jonathan had established in Sofia's name now funded 12 other families facing similar crises, and Rosa volunteered at the hospital where her daughter had been treated, helping parents navigate the maze of medical bills and insurance claims that had once seemed insurmountable to her. She still visited the Sterling mansion once a week, not as a maid but as a friend, often bringing Sofia to play in the gardens where butterflies danced among flowers that had never looked more beautiful. On a particularly bright afternoon, as Rosa watched Sofia chase monarchs through Jonathan's garden, while she and Jonathan sat on his terrace discussing her upcoming clinical rotations, she reflected on the moment that had changed everything. The day she'd told a billionaire to shut up had become the day she'd found her voice, and in finding it, she discovered that sometimes the most powerful transformations begin with the courage to speak truth to power. You know, Jonathan said, watching Sofia's delight as a butterfly landed on her outstretched finger, I used to think wealth was about accumulation, building more, earning more, acquiring more. But you taught me that real wealth is about circulation, taking what you have and letting it flow to where it can do the most good. Rosa smiled, her hand resting on the textbook that would help her save other children like Sofia. My grandmother used to say that we're all just stewards of whatever we're given, whether it's money or love or time. Our job isn't to hoard it, but to share it in ways that multiply the blessings. As they sat in comfortable silence, watching Sofia discover the magic of wings and metamorphosis, Rosa knew that her daughter would grow up in a world where love had proven stronger than poverty, where courage had overcome circumstance, and where the simple act of refusing to be silent had transformed not just their lives, but the life of a man who had everything except the ability to see beyond his own privilege. The acts of depth family knows that behind every service worker, every tired face in line at the grocery store, every person the society overlooks, there's a story of love and sacrifice that could humble us all. If Rosa's courage to speak her truth inspired you to see the humanity in everyone you encounter, share this story with someone who needs to remember that we're all fighting battles others can't see. Subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and remember, sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest words, the truth spoken with courage, love expressed without fear, and the recognition that we're all connected in ways that wealth and poverty can't divide. In the end, we're all just human beings deserving of dignity, respect, and the chance to fight for those we love.